PGA Nation, we did it. We're back again. We're staying in Hawaii. We're at Waialae Country Club, and I am excited for getting back to what we're used to, a normal golf tournament, a full field, a cut event, a tournament where we probably won't have multiple people going 30 under. So it's going to be back to the basics, it feels like, which I'm excited about. And I'm excited to dive in. Unfortunately, our trusted co-host Sia Najad is away this week, but you still have me and you still have Spencer Aguiar. Spence, how you doing tonight?
I am doing well. You know, rumor has it that when Sia said to sell everything last week for the first round leader bet, that he ended up selling his hair in the process. I'm sure he got millions for it, along with millions on his Cam Smith ticket, but I heard it has to grow back before he wanted to get on camera with us. We have to respect that decision and do the best in his absence that we can.
That's totally fair. I mean, it was obviously worth it since he hit the Cam Smith ticket, which he said he was going to bet.
Perfect.
So might as well put all your money on it, especially all that hair was worth a lot. So that
a lot of money.
Yeah. But, you know, we did. I mean, in the betting market, I know you had a really good week in the outright market. Sia hit that play. So we're off to a good start. We want to keep that momentum early in the year. As I always say, I find the best way to find consistency in golf is to play weekly. Because, yes, when you start really materializing those trends and you can really see, you know, who's popping each week while you're following each tournament. So we're getting on our grind right now. And we can dive right into this tournament. I think it'll be good to break down this course. Again, this is going to play, I mean, different than last week in that, one, you're not going to get all the all-stars. Right? It's not the Champions course. It's more of a regular-looking field. Two, you're not going to get this many guys this low. I mean, last week was wild in terms of how low the scores were. I mean, things were changing from day to day. You could have been in the top 10 and completely out of the tournament by the next day. So I think this will feel a little bit more normal. But as always, I would love to just hear, I'm looking forward to hearing, Spence, your breakdown of, you know, what you're looking for this week at Waialae and how you're going to kind of handicap some of the golfers and who you're targeting for the weekend.
Yeah, I want to keep this course breakdown within a reasonable amount of time today, but there is one thing I want to discuss about this track in general. I've mentioned it a few times already on different platforms, but Waialae Country Club is the second most predictive on tour when it comes to rollover success from year to year. That sounds fun to say. It's a nice statistic to throw out there, but it's horrible for DraftKings contests if we believe we have an advantage in the way we construct lineups and break down a venue. The best way I keep describing it is that when the course predictability increases, our skill of being unique decreases. I can still get weird in the way that I build my model, which I did. But if your answers aren't starting towards the players that have found past success, you're probably doing something wrong. That's the issue with this course. But when we look at Waialae Country Club, it was designed in 1925 by Seth Rayner and underwent an enhancement by Tom Doak in 2016. The improvement was meant to bring back the old school feel of the property, and I think that he did that perfectly. The venue's really straightforward. It is flat. It's boring. It's not what we saw last week of everything being hilly with big greens. There are dog legs where golfers will need to work the ball in both directions, but what you see is what you get. There are 12 par 4s in general. 10 of them stretch between 400 to 500 yards. That produces 12.8% more second shots that come from 125 to 200 yards than tour average. I noticed a heavy correlation between the PGA Tour's definition of ball striking and that being a positive result. That combination looks at a mixture of accuracy and distance, then blends in GIR percentage to derive a total there. Wind is going to be important. If it gets windy, that's really the only defense of the course. We've seen it be 3 shots more impactful when there is wind. And then really at the end of the day, you just have to make putts. Putting has been 4.3% more impactful to the dispersion of scores than an average stop. None of what I just said is that unique. You do have some interesting proximity distances. The par 4s clutter up together, but it's basic in all senses of the word. So I put 30% on overall weight on course history. As I mentioned, second most impactful there. I think it matters. I think you do need to look at it. I started from a statistical perspective with 17.5% on easy scoring at shorter courses. We are going to need birdie makers. I want course specific fits. I added to that by doing 10% on overall birdie or better percentage. As I mentioned, putting is going to play a big factor. So I did 20% on a mixture category that took strokes gained total on Bermuda and strokes gained putting on Bermuda. I did 10% on a weighted proximity category that is meant to mimic Waialae. 67.6% of irons come between 125 to 200 yards. I recalculated the totals as if that took in every single iron shot. I know it doesn't, but 27.7% from 125 to 150, 37.7 from 150 to 175, 34.6 from 175 to 200. That's the recalculated distribution that's in my model. If you look at it, that's going to go hand in hand with the 17.5% I placed on weighted par 4 category. That's par for average. That's 400 to 450 yards, 450 to 500 yards. And then I wrapped it up with 25% on ball striking. I took an even distribution of distance and accuracy to get my total driving, and then took 65% of GIR and 35% of total driving to get my ball striking mark.
I like it. I think you made a really good point there, though, with this course in thinking about, what the negative of it from a tournament perspective is that, it's gonna drive ownership a great deal to these guys with history that have competed here before, that have had success. And it makes sense, right? Those are the guys we want to target, which is just going to make it difficult to be unique. But we're going to do our best to find ways to show you how we're doing that, kind of different ways, different directions to point, which we're looking into, and hopefully we can find that winning lineup this week. So let's dive right into it. We'll start in this top tier, and we'll include our lone currng champion, Cameron Smith, who is coming off of a wild week in the 11K range and the 10K and 11K range combined. Spence, who looking at the top?
Yeah, so we're back to 144 players. That's the positive to it. It's more of a normal tournament, as you stated at the beginning. But the top of the board is tough, kind of like we keep saying with it. My model has the top 4 golfers priced as the best 5 plays. Even a guy like Mark Leishman is 8th overall for me. And all of this kind of stretches back to what I was saying at the start of the show about trying to figure out a way to get out of this roster construction loophole where everyone is landing on the same guys in the same exact tiers. The leverage play is going to be Hideki. He continues to drop with each passing minute, but I have my concerns with him. I don't think he makes enough putts to warrant the price tag if his upside is limited. There are roundabout ways of using him. Something like Hideki and Connors would make a good mix and match of ownership. It's easy to internally process that if you swap their price tags in your mind. I do think Hideki is a better play than Leishman, Answer, Nas, all those guys of the world when we remove price from the equation. I like Answer and Nas. We can talk about that more when we get into the 9Ks, but there is a small upgrade in my opinion. Ownership aside, I like Webb and Sungjae. Those would be my 2 favorite targets. Webb rolls over his course history better than any player on tour, and Sungjae has turned his irons around lately, gaining 2.25 per start over his last 4. But I guess what it comes down to here is that the options of how to play it are wide open. I would be cognizant of the collected ownership you are placing into your construction from all 6 players, but none of these guys have ever burned lineups to the ground at this track in the past. That makes some of the mistakes that will be made less critical if it continues down that road. I don't know if you necessarily have to start in this range. One of Kevin Na, Cameron Smith, Abraham Answer, Hideki would be the unique ways to start something, but I do like Webb and Sungjae the best, as much as it pains me to say it. But before I get your answer, I actually want to ask you a question when it comes to game theory here. Do you think there's any credence in stacking 2 from the top? And we can go into any of the 2, either Cam or Hideki mixed with anyone would automatically be more unique. But I was more so thinking the Webb Sungjae route because both are so popular. Yes, you eat the ownership if you do it, but do you think you separate your starts up enough by sometimes considering that option?
Listen, I think you can consider it more so in a field like this for the reason that what you'll inevitably have to do is have 4, at least a few lower tier guys who there's just a ton of really low ownership there. So you'll come around to becoming unique by the rest of filling out your lineup, right? And I definitely wouldn't say you can't play some of these top guys, like you said. I think they are the best guys in the field. I don't think you have to play them, but I certainly think you can play multiple and then get unique in lower tier guys. So certainly, especially with these bigger fields, I worry less about ownership in terms of like, can I play an individual? I think all individuals are in play. Where you want to look at ownership is as your roster as a whole. As 6 guys, can you keep that ownership low?
Exactly. I think that's where you have to be cognizant of that thing. You're really looking at the 6 players there because you can start with anybody and still build it out fine. It's just you can't start lineups Webb, Connors, Henley, and expect to be different in that fashion. So I agree with you. I think that's the most important thing, and I do think it's wide open for that reason.
For sure. And I think that's the biggest unique thing about one. Like, let's not forget this is a cut event, right? We haven't had a cut event in a long time. It's a different thought process. Cut makers are important, right? And so when you want to, like, my biggest concern of playing two guys up top is, can you get 6 cut makers? Because now you have to start diving in and throwing some more darts on guys in the lower range just to fill out your roster. Now, it could be for like a GPP, it can be a wise strategy because when that hits, or if that hits, you're going to be set up in a really good position. But getting cut makers is a different mentality than, like, even before last week. There was a bunch of tournaments we were playing that weren't, there were small fields that weren't, cut tournaments. So it was different. Now having these cut tournaments again, don't forget how important getting cut makers is and how much you're going to be thinking about. I hope you think about me saying this on Friday night when the cut's happening and they're going there and you're like, man, I should have been more diligent about the bottom of my roster because I got to get those cut makers, right? Keep that in mind. You always say it Friday, but you're thinking about that when you build your rosters going up to Thursday. So keep that in mind this week for sure. For me up here, I think I have a similar take to you right now, just based on first look. It looks like the ownership for Cam Smith is low. That's a few factors. I think people do take into account coming off of a win like he did. It's hard to repeat, right, and do that again. Also, his price is, through the roof. This is really high for Cam Smith, which kind of, is enough for me to say he's considerable, considering he obviously is playing good golf and you can get him at that 15% ownership. He's won this tournament before, so he's capable. And then like you said with Webb, I think Webb is one of those guys where it's like when Webb Simpson plays in tournaments that are Webb Simpson tournaments, he comes through. Right? It doesn't mean he's going to win it, but he comes through. I would feel so confident in him getting a top 10 this week. He always does it, right? So those are the types of guys where with Webb for a GPP, top 10 is not good enough, right? At this price, he needs to be top 5. So for me, he is what he is. I'm going to play some of them because I do think he's going to do well. And then it's a matter of, how much exposure I want to have if I think he actually has, how much win equity that there might be for him this week. Outside of that, I think I have some concerns with Hideki on the putter this week. Him not really, he had once that tied for 12th, which was decent, but at the price we'd have to pay for him, I think I can just find other plays. I agree. Sung Jae is probably my second favorite play here, but the combination of price and ownership, I think there's better value in roster construction being more balanced. So my preference will be to go lower. So I will have some Webb. I will sprinkle in some Cam Smith and some Sung Jae, but other than that, I actually prefer a more balanced build this week. So with that being said, let's head right back down into the 9K range, Spence. Who are you looking at here?
Yeah, I think Corey Connor should have been priced in the 10,000s. I mean, unfortunately, he wasn't, and ownership's running wild with him like we're getting with all these guys. But 12th here in 2020, 3rd in 2019. He ranks 1st in overall ball striking in my model. The putter has always been the one thing that's held him back, but he's gained over twice as many strokes on these greens versus other courses. I think he's in play just because of a value number with that. Kevin Knott, 9,900 is intriguing. Defending champions are usually over-owned or under-owned in the next time they tee it up at the track. Knott seems to be falling into that second category at roughly 10%. Thought he looked great last week with his 13th place finish. That's about as good as you could have expected from him at a course with wide open fairways. And he now gets a chance to use his accuracy and putter to find success. Answer carries the second best upside in my model at 9,700. It's kind of going to what you're saying with it. You can find upside guys in this range at half the ownership with it. I worry a little bit about how he played last week. It wasn't the best course fit for him. I don't think that that's the place I would have played him. I kind of had concerns going into that week, but didn't look good. And a guy like Kevin Na did look good, and those are two guys that have very similar game styles. So that's worrisome. The course history for him is a little bit worrisome, but I almost view this how I view the Henley situation in the 8,000s, although Henley is much more popular. It's like you have the upside, but there is more volatility that you're going to have on a guy like Answer and Henley. And then I want to get your thoughts on Harris English. I mentioned it on my other show. I think I have to be out. I don't care what the ownership is at this point. He has tanked so many positive builds of mine, and I don't know that it's necessarily turning around. Like, he's looking worse every single week. So, it makes sense with the ownership of what it is, but I almost have to turn the other eye. And then Taylor Gooch just has too much historical volatility for me at this point if the ownership's going to keep ascending. I'm seeing about 20%, which is 9 or 10% higher than I would find proper for a golfer that has gone miscut, 63rd miscut over his last 3 trips at this track. I get he's a better golfer now than he's ever been in his career. I don't hate his upside potential, but these are answers I'm giving. Like, bet him as a top 10. You're going to need that anyway to pay off the price. So if you like Gooch, I'd almost just rather bet him as a top 10 and move about it that way.
Yeah, I think what my concern is that, and you were spot on. I like a lot of the same guys, and if everyone's going to be seeing the same thing, which is why the ownership might be driven even higher. Kevin Na, I think, makes a lot of sense. I love the way Kevin Na is playing. Kevin Na is the type of guy that is streaky, right? When he's hot, he'll string together a few really good tournaments. He'll keep momentum. And when he's called, he's horrible. He's unplayable, and you just kind of ignore him. So right now, he's in that hot streak. I think it's time to play him now. He's priced up. I mean, 9,900. You need to get some results out of Kevin Na, right? We're used to playing Kevin Na in the 7K range as a mid-tier guy where he kind of explodes. Now we're playing him as your all-star, as the guy you need to carry your lineup, which is a little bit different, which is why, I don't think he's like a must play, but I think the combination of that with his ownership looks more than reasonable right now. That's why I really like him. If his ownership goes up to above 15%, I'll probably move off of him. But at close to 10%, 11%, I'm definitely okay with taking that shot on Na. I think Corey Connors, he kind of reminds me a bit of Webb, in that those courses that he plays well, he consistently always plays well. So I think he has a little bit of Webb in him, in that this is a course that he does well at. He's priced reasonably. The ownership's going to be high, so it's one you're going to have to eat, but I think it's probably worth eating, even more so than Webb, because it's a little bit of salary saving. So you can still kind of build a little bit more uniquely having Connors in your lineup. But those two I really like. Other than that, I don't like much in this range either. I have similar concerns on English as you. One thing I feel with English is, if you recall last year, he was in a bit of a rut, and it came out afterwards that he had a back injury, and no one knew, and people were playing him, and he wasn't playing well, and it's like, oh, I was playing this guy who was hurt this whole time. I don't know that he's hurt, but I just have a speculation, and he's not playing the same type of golf that we're used to seeing him play. He was so bad off the tee last week that to me, I mean, I have no science behind this. That to me speaks injury, right? Like, why would somebody be that bad off the tee? He's a professional golfer. Usually they figure it out. To me, that he's not, to be that bad off the tee on a course where people are going 30 under tells me something's wrong. It's not just he's not playing well. So until I see something that gives me some confidence in him, I'm not gonna take that risk. So I'm off of him as well. And now let's go down to this 8K range, because I think this is where we can start to find the value plays. I think this is where I'm going to start finding my core, the guys I really want to kind of go forward with strongly this week. So I'll kick us off here. We can start at the top with Kisner. I think Kisner's in play. I like Kisner. I think this is a course that he could find some success at. His ownership is more than reasonable. He's got 2 top 5s here in the last 5 years. This price is a little high for Kevin Kisner. I don't love that. But again, this field after the top 10 guys is pretty watered down. So you're going to have to take some chances on some guys like that. Billy Horschel, I think he's a better for this field. This price is more than fine for him, right? Because Billy Horschel could have been in that mid 9K range in this field and no one would have batted an eye. Also at the sub 10% ownership, he also has that, top 10 last year. I mean, Billy Horschel makes sense. I don't love Billy. I don't think he's a must play. I'm going to be hammering him, but I think he certainly makes sense for someone you want to throw into a few of your lineups. People love Russell Henley here. This is the one where I think if we were to do a good chalk, bad chalk segment, I would put bad chalk on Henley. I think people are getting a little overzealous on him. I do certainly think I understand where people are coming from. My main reason for coming off of him is I don't really look at Henley as a big advantage over any of these guys ahead of him, Kisner, Horschel, or Kokrak, and you're getting twice the ownership. So give me the half the ownership with some of these other guys who I find to be pretty similar golfers. An interesting one to talk about. I'd love to get your feedback on is Matt Jones, right? I mean, he's coming off an historic weekend. I mean, he broke the course record. He had 2 days in a row where he was just playing unbelievable golf. Is he going to carry that momentum over? Was that just the course that he caught a hot streak? What's your take on Matt Jones this week?
I like Matt Jones. I think he potentially keeps the train rolling in Hawaii. Like, let's see where this ownership is as of Wednesday. But if he can hover outside of the top 15 projection totals, the safety Jones brings allows us to remove some of the other qualities that I think we would like to see. He is in play for me 100%. And kind of just going back to what you were saying with Kisner here, take Kisner and take Leishman, to take any of those, Billy Horschel. These guys are all the same caliber of player, more or less. To say that Leishman is $10,000 and he's going to be 20-something% owned, and Billy Horschel is going to be, in the 8,000s here. That's one of the reasons why Horschel is one of my favorite plays. I just think he could easily be a $10,000 golfer. 7th place finish last year. He ranks 15th at easy courses under 7,200 yards and 9th in my mixture of Bermuda scoring. Iron play is always the question mark, but with me taking a different route and trying to find value by mimicking the venue, he jumps over 30 spots between 125 to 150 yards. Harris English is technically the best leverage play I have on the board. We discussed why we're not going to play him. I think you're actually right with that too, because even if we just look, it's not just the start last week. It's like 2 months of horrible finishes, and he withdrew from the CJ Cup. I forget what the reasoning was behind that, but I just think something's not right with Harris English at this point. So I would say that, like, if you're looking for the best leverage play, it's probably Horschel, because you can actually utilize that advantage of him being sub 10%. And then the only other person that I am going to mention that I like this week, and I hate playing this guy because I think his upside is so limited, and at $8,000, you're paying for everything that's being baked into it. But I mean, have we seen course history the way that Charles Howell brings course history here? He hasn't missed a cut during 19 tries at this venue. He's provided 15 top 30s in those 19 tries. 9 of those have landed inside of the top 8. The ownership's going up. That's a little, that's not what I want to see. I think he's a better cash game play. I ended up laying the juice. I have a top 40 ticket on him also, but I do think he provides an overall level of safety, like 15 top 30s in 19 tries. Like, you can't just scoff at that.
And that the biggest thing with that is at 8K, that I think is totally fine, right? Like, if he was 9K or 9, it's like top 30 doesn't mean anything, because he needs to get, you need to have a top result for those top guys. But at 8K, he can be a middling golfer. He'll seems like he'll probably make the cut. He's pretty safe. So you can take safety in an 8K golfer. So I think that makes a lot of sense with Howell there. And at 10%, that doesn't concern me. 10% is totally fine.
That's still fine. I agree.
If it gets to 15 and up, that's when it starts becoming a little too much for him. But at 10, I'm totally fine with that.
Can I backtrack just into the 9,000s one more time? Because you mentioned 15% for Kevin Na. That's the exact number that my model believes becomes too high for him. So I think at 10%, like I've mentioned this on the show before, he's overpriced at where he is. Yes. But if you can leverage it in the other way, that's where your advantage comes. It doesn't always have to be. I mean, if a guy is so overpriced and he's going to, I mean, this isn't this example, but he's going to be like 1% owned and nobody's going to play him, and your model is saying that he still should be a certain X amount of golfer in this field, that's how you create your leverage in these spots. So Kevin Na is a perfect leverage opportunity. He's overpriced. Don't get it wrong, but you're going to be able to leverage this if it's going to be sub 15%.
I always say, a golfer you like, if you really like somebody, them being overpriced is a good thing, because that's going to get you the ownership down. You'd rather overspend on low ownership than have a guy that's low. The price is reasonable, but the ownership's high. You'd rather just overspend on the low ownership, because that's how you win a tournament, and that's how you make a difference.
It's the Corey Connors conundrum that I'm running into this week. I wish they would have just made him $11,000. Like, that's what I think he should have been. Like, I think Connors is an elite talent, and I think, this is the perfect venue for him, as you said. Like, it's like these are the courses that he always finds success at. He has 2 top 12s coming here. I'd much rather him, like, swap him with Hideki. I would be perfect. Put him at 10,600. Let the ownership drop because people don't want to pay 10,600. I would have been so overweight to Corey Connors, it would have been insane. But where he is right now, it just makes it more difficult. I'm going to find a way to play him. I still think you're fine with it, but it's just, you got to be very aware of who you're pairing him with.
Totally. I'm aligned with you on that one for sure. The only other name I will mention up down this 8K range is, and did he withdraw? Did I miss something? Is Van Rooyen still playing?
From what I'm aware of with it, I mean, he has no ownership, but I think that's more so that people just don't want to play him.
That's why I asked. I was like, his ownership is so low. I'm like, am I missing something? And that's why I'm considering it, because he does have upside. Let's see, he's only played here once. He missed the cut, which, not great but it's only one try. It's not like it's a consistency. There was a while last week where he was in contention. Now, obviously, it was a crazy tournament, and that swung hugely. But still, to me, that tells me he's the field this week, even though there's 3 times the amount of golfers, 4 times the amount of golfers, is way worse than what he was going up against last week. So for the almost no ownership, Van Nieuwen's someone I would definitely consider in this field, because he does have upside, and he's more than affordable. I mean, I actually think it's an ownership play, but I think he's interesting here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I think the point that you just made is 100% where this comes, because I'm trying to fade him when it comes to like a head-to-head wager. He's a massive difference when I'm looking at his safety rating here, but he's one of the biggest climbers I have in my model when looking for upside. And, I'm seeing, I don't know what you're seeing. I see 3.4% right now. It might even be going lower than that, but yeah, like he has the upside to find potential, and that's really what you're looking for. Like, that's one of the spots where you can differentiate yourself very easily. I don't know if Van Rooyen's the guy I like doing it the most with, but I think the thought process of it, like, that's how you can find unique ways to make a build.
I do want to ask you something. So how are you looking at prior course history if you didn't have any here? Do you think guys who have not played this course before are going to be at a big disadvantage? Do you feel like you need to have at least seen this course before to get some success here? Or do you feel like being new to the course shouldn't hurt you, even though there is an advantage for guys who have played well here before? We definitely want to play them. But what about the guys that just haven't played?
I think to win, it's a problem. I think when we get lower on this board, like if we have guys in the $7,000 and they haven't played the course, I'm willing to work around that. I do think it affects you a little bit when you start moving up in price tag and you're paying a higher salary for somebody that maybe hasn't played the course or has really bad course history, like a Gooch in this situation. But yeah, I mean, I think when you get lower, you can certainly find success. I think the more you play it, the better it will be for it. But you're not like, I'm not going to take somebody off of my board because they haven't played it. And one of the ways I build my model is for these guys, when they don't have course history, it automatically makes them the worst player in the field on that. And that's not accurate. Like, that can't be the way that we have it. I go in by hand for every single player and somewhat try to mimic it for what their price is in comparison to the other players for the week. I'll move them a little bit higher because you can't give them benefit of the doubt that they're going to play well. But I'm never going to solely take somebody off my board and say, in my ranking system, they're one of the 10 worst plays because they've never played the course. They'll have a number that they're going to be, within the top 40 or 50 plays, and it's not going to hurt them. And when I run the model for upside and when I look at it more for statistics with it, if the guy pops off the page, then it's like, okay, well, let's see what would happen if I do this. What happens when I change this on my model? And, when the answers start getting that this guy gets better and better and better in certain equations with it. And then if I make the course history just be a little bit better, that's the intriguing spots where I start jumping in.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And the main reason I'm asking is because we're going to see this a lot early in the year to me, it feels like there's a big influx of this new kind of wave of Korn Ferry guys that are now PGA Tour guys. So there's going to be a lot of guys that don't have a lot of experience on some of these courses that we know are, competitive golfers. So trying to figure out where do they kind of stand in their first attempts at some of these. So, well, actually, a guy we passed over, I guess, before we move on. I know he's your boy. What about Seamus Power?
I had a conversation on my Be the Number podcast about Seamus, and I would like to get your opinion on this, and I will provide mine afterwards. But, Seamus is 34 years old, I believe. It's a journeyman guy who is hitting his stride later on in his career. Now, I guess let me answer this very quickly on my end of it. The thing I like about that is my model was higher on him 18 months prior to him making this run. I think a lot of this had to do with he couldn't get into the fields. He was struggling. He had the month to qualify for these tournaments. Those are issues for a golfer. Now that he has himself in this position, we're seeing the best of him because I think statistically he's always been this type of a golfer. I worry a little bit about him at this venue just with the ownership percentage that we're getting. I'm seeing 18% right now. And if there is, and we didn't see it last week, but if there is any regression that takes place, and my model doesn't necessarily like him in general this week. That is my concern, that if you can get rid of 18% of people, and we are looking at course history that is miscut, 54th, 49th, like that would be a big portion of people to get rid of.
I would agree with you in that it's the combination of poor course history with high ownership that seems like it's not a great formula for him this week. My only counter to that is, from what we've seen out of him in the last 4 to 6 months, he's a better golfer than his price tag in this field. Mm-hmm. So I think there's upside with him, but the upside you want to chase, I think, is better on guys like Horschel, where it's like low ownership with upside, not necessarily chasing the high ownership upside. It's a little more awkward, but for that reason, I won't fade him. I'll have some exposure. Because I can build rosters that just have an 8K guy as good as Seamus Power is going to help, but it won't be high exposure. I'll probably just be low.
Do you like him more than Maverick McNeely?
That's a good one. That's a good comparison. In general, the answer is yes. Here, that McNeely's a tough one because he doesn't have any history. So you don't have that. You can't really – I don't like holding the history against Power if he doesn't have any, because I don't know if he's good or bad. So I kind of would neutralize there. The ownership, McNeely is a little bit better, but McNeely's ownership is pretty high. It's not like you're getting low ownership. So while Power's a little bit more, I think I would lean Power in that.
Yeah, I think it's very, very close between those two guys. I mean, as you said, McNeely's never played this course before. When I run it for safety, and this is Seamus getting the negative effects of the course history more so, he's worse. When I run it for upside, Seamus is better. So that probably goes to your point that Seamus provides a little bit more upside. It's going to be a little bit more ownership, but for 2 or 3%, that's not going to dissuade me from going Seamus if that's kind of where I'm at there.
Yeah, I'm aligned with that for sure. All right, let's take a look at this 7K range, because this 7K range is, to me, going to be really important this week. I think I'm going to find a big part of my core coming from this range, trying to find these value plays to round out those lines that we are cramming in, our Connors, our Webbs, what have you. So, Spence, kick us off. Who do you like here in the 7K range?
If you gave me one bet this week, and that's assuming it's at the consensus odds for the golfer that the wager would be going on, it would probably go on Siwoo Kim for me at 60-1. I have Kim inside the top 10 in outright win equity. He places 9th at easy courses under 7,200 yards. There's always going to be combustibility that he falters. Maybe that's where you're going with that. We still need cut makers. But if the thing that is different here, if you tell me that the guy can win the tournament at sub 10%, that I'm willing to take on it. And I think Siwoo has a pretty good chance to compete this week. He's one of my favorite plays at 6 or 7%. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the ownership is very high for Joel Dahman at 7,600. I kind of think it's a good price for him. 2 top 22s in his last 2 trips at YLI, inside the top 25 when it comes to proximity, birdie or better percentage, at total driving. Playing Dahman likely works better when you pair him with some of the more under the radar plays than if you go him and Webb, for example. But he's kind of underpriced for me. He's one of the biggest underpriced guys I have. So anytime that pops up, that's something I consider. I think it's a good setup for Brendan Todd at 7,500. First in this field in putting on Bermuda, also the top player for accuracy. I'm marginally surprised he's not more popular. I know the form hasn't been great recently. He's one of the guys where I feel like when he plays, I've been recommending him on this show every single week. And sometimes it's worked okay. Other times it hasn't. But I think it's a good price tag for Todd at 7,500. We know that he can win.
My concern with Todd is that his history is mediocre. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not great. And you're right. On paper, what Todd is hammers fairways, makes these putts. He looks like a great fit, but he hasn't actually done it. So I guess that's where I'm having pause with Todd. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I agree to you with an extent. I didn't end up putting a top 40 wager on him for that exact reason that you mentioned there. There is some back end concern, but it's not like he's been horrible. 41st to 21st here. Now, with that being said, we can take courses that are shorter, like the RSM Classic, spots like that where he missed the cut recently. And I think that's a little troublesome. Now, I'm not going to hold past results against anybody over this past 2 months. I think current form in general is going to be a little bit overrated looking at it. But yeah, that was the one drawback I had when trying to put him into other facets of the market. But I think he's relatively safe to make a cut if you want to play him for a cash game. And even though it's contradictory to say that he's good for cash and then he's also good for GPPs, but I don't love him for a top 40. Like, I know all of that doesn't make complete sense with it, but at 6.2% ownership where I have him, I'm kind of fine taking a shot with him as an upside play. And if he won the tournament, I wouldn't be shocked if he missed the cut. I think it is in the cards for him. And there's another guy I'm going to get to in a second that probably even more so falls under that.
Tell me, who is it?
So what are your thoughts on Chris Kirk this week?
Kirk. Kirk's a tough one because Kirk is someone that we've seen when he's put it together a few times, and when he's played really well. What I like about Kirk is, he was tied for second last year. He has a top 10 in the last 5, but he also has 3 missed cuts. So he's truly the definition of like anything can happen here. He can get you a top 10. He can miss the cut. You're really throwing the dice. He's sub 10%. I don't love him, but he's not someone I'm going to completely fade. That's where I would say I am on Kirk.
Here's where I think the best way to play Kirk would be, and this is what I recommended on the Better Golf podcast. Play him as a top 10. I think that makes a lot of logical sense here. In his last 9 trips, 4 top 10s, 4 missed cuts. If he misses the cut, you lose your top 10 wager. If he makes a run at this, you have a chance on that ticket at pretty good odds there. So I kind of think that that's probably the best way to do it. The ownership's a little bit higher than I would hope for. Like, he's one of those guys where if you would have told me he was 1% or 2%, sign me up to be different in that way. But at 7-8%, it's a little bit higher than I would like there. And then after that, it's just going to be a lot of mixing and matching for me. I think Brian Harman's intriguing at 7,500. I am very curious to hear your take on Emiliano Grillo, Keegan Bradley. A guy like Russell Knox, I've never been correct on, but those are ball strikers for this course if they can make some putts. I have a top 40 bet on Stuart Sink. I think that equates to being in play for DFS. And then it's going to be a handful of Korn Ferry players like Chad Ramey, Alex Smalley. Those are guys that my model just continues to be higher on than, I guess, consensus throughout the industry. And there's a couple guys in the 6,000s that we can get to on the Korn Ferry Tour once we get down there. But that's going to be it for me for the most part. I really like Siwoo Kim. He's going to be the guy I have the most exposure to. And then a lot of mixing and matching.
Yeah, one thing you said that I think is a really good point that people should keep in mind is this is a weird time of year for golf. We're kind of really just getting back into it. There's been a long kind of layoff. So don't overrate current form because people are going to look at the last tournaments that happened 2 months ago and be like, oh, he's not playing. Well, that was 2 months ago. Where guys playing now from 2 months ago. And even though it was the last tournament they played and it was still 2 months ago, they could be completely different form now. It's a lot different when the last tournament was last week or 2 weeks ago. And that's their current form. Now I'm going to put a lot less weight on current form based on so these tournaments were a long time ago, and I want to give these guys who are starting this new year a fresh start. So I think that's a really solid point. Kind of looking here in this 7K range, one guy I think is really interesting. I'm curious. I hope he's healthy. Is Brandon Steele? And Brandon Steele does have issues where he tends to have back. Like I get memories of Kevin Na when everyone planned he withdrew after one round. You're like, what the heck? Now, I don't think Steele withdraws as much, but I think he does play through injury a lot, and you don't know how healthy he might be. However, where I like what's to like about Steele is he's 2 top 5s in his last 2 outings at 11%. I don't think that ownership is a little high, but it's reasonable. You can play him there. It's not going to scare me away. And in a 7.9 price range, that's totally reasonable for him here. So. Not someone I'm going to be all in on, but definitely someone I'm going to be playing. I actually prefer him to Kirk. I think, there's probably a better likelihood that he would even just get like a 20th place or something like that,
That's
opposed
fair.
to just Kirk's 10 or cut type of hit or miss, persona. In a similar vein, I don't like as much, but I think Ryan Palmer's in play too. I mean, Ryan Palmer does have a top 5 in the last 2 years here. He's sub 5% ownership, which is really good. Now, we haven't seen the Ryan Palmer we like in some time. Like I said, it's kind of like a fresh start, unless you think Ryan Palmer's done, which is not a question. He's getting old. I mean, he's not the youngest guy, but I don't think he's done. I think we're going to see another run out of him where he looks, like a competitive golfer. And, you're taking a shot. It's a gamble, but I think this is someone in a free GPP you can take a shot on here. As we go down, I like Siwoo. I think that was a good call by you on him. He'll be someone that I will incorporate into some of my lineups. Keith Mitchell is another guy who seems more like a cash play to me than GPP. I like him. I'll play him. But he's someone who, of his last 4, he has a top 25, 16th, and 14th, and a missed cut. I think this course probably should suit him decently well. I think if he's striking the ball well this week, he can certainly compete here. I'm concerned by Joel Dahmen's ownership. If he wasn't at 20%, he would have been one of my guys for this week for sure. At 20%, I think he's a little bit more preferred than some of these guys, but not enough where I'd rather just take a couple shots on some of these other guys that are right next to him and get half the ownership. And that would be my gamble for this kind of range. So I do think he can do well this week. I'm not against the play of Joel Dahmen. I'm more against the game theory that of the caliber golfer he is and the ownership, it just doesn't make sense for a big tournament. As we go down to the bottom of this range, Matt Kuchar, I'm no longer playing. I think you can look at his history here and make a case for why you'd want to play him. I think he's over the hill, and I've limited him from my player pool until he proves me otherwise. So I won't be playing him. I'm not going to get baited into it because he has a good course history. I'm also looking at the fact that his last 2 outings here, he missed the cut. So he was previously good here, but I think maybe that ship may have sailed. An interesting one who doesn't have any course history. I'd like to get your take on Denny McCarthy.
One of the things I've noticed, I guess, which would be a negative thing, is I know he's popular this week on a lot of the offshore books that I respect, and this is more of an outright ticket than anything else. He is going in so the wrong direction. So a lot of times when you look at these offshore books and you look at these outright markets and really the credible ones, you can write me. I can tell you what the books are to check them out with it. But there are certain books that when you see a guy moving, you know that it's a real move and not a public move being made. And on the contrary to that, when they're bloating in price, that's a really bad sign. And Denny McCarthy is bloating in price the worst of anybody that I've seen in this range. So he opened at about 80 to 1. I believe at most of these books, he's about 120 to 1 right now. Now, I think he's okay. He's in the top 30 of my model. He's a very slight value at 7,400. Where he becomes a negative value is when I look at the ownership there. That's kind of where the script flips for me a little bit. But why did you like Denny McCarthy?
Well, actually, I'm hoping you can educate me because I think you made a really good point. What's obvious, what we all know is when the odds on someone come down, it's because there's a lot of bets, right? And they want to even it out. And that makes total sense. Why would the number go the other way?
They're not getting bets on them, and it's one of those things where they're probably trying to entice some people, sucker some people in to make a wager at a number. And these credible books that do these things, at a lot of your legal shops, they have to be much more stringent with how they move things, and it's going to be more of, you can get some real advantages. They're also going to post some prices that are just horrible. These offshore books and the credible ones and some of these big time ones, they can be a little bit more aggressive in how they play things. So for a guy like Denny McCarthy, when he moves the opposite way there, and I know that he's popular on DraftKings, I don't know if people are betting him in the outright market. It just seems like one of those spots where they are trying to set that bet up a little bit. Now, I don't hate him. Like as I said, he's a top 30 play for me. That's usually the cutoff line of what my first thing I look for when punching an outright ticket. He's a positive value against DraftKings. He's a negative value when he was 80 to 1. So if I moved him to a 90 to 1, I guess he would be a value. So he's kind of right in the range of where he should be by my numbers. So, I would say the 125 is decent value there, and you're not going to find that everywhere. I mean, mostly you're going to get the price of where it should be on it. But that would be my only thought, is that he's very popular for a guy who does bring form in. I mean, 3 top 15s in a row, but that would be my only thought behind it.
I can tell you what's going on. In my opinion, what's going on with him this week. If you run a lot of these sites, if you want to look at guys who perform well putting on Bermuda, which they're putting on this week, he's going to jump a lot, and I think people are seeing that. And I think when I ran it, he was number 1. So I think people will look at those models and see, oh, well, I want to get the guy who putts best on this surface. And then you see Denny's popping. I think that's where the ownership's coming from, because a lot of people run that report. And that's what's boosting his ownership up. And now hearing what you're saying, I think that's probably getting overrated. Yeah, it's a little something, but it's not something I don't think it's worth playing him based off that alone.
I would agree with that. And he's number one in my 2-year model on Bermuda greens. The two things that really set him back, which, I mean, it's great for him that he even came 29th with the way I have him at some of these numbers, which I guess shows where he is good on this course. But 103rd for weighted proximity. The irons are always going to be the problem. 83rd overall for overall birdie or better percentage. Good par 4 scorer. That saved the day for him a little bit. As we mentioned with it, he's number 2 for me in the mixture that I ran on strokes gained total on Bermuda and Bermuda putting. He is number 1 on just Bermuda putting. He's 8th in strokes gained total with it. He's good at courses under 7,200 yards, but it's going to be the irons and the birdie making that I don't know if he can put enough together to actually win the tournament. If we're talking about DraftKings, maybe it's a different story. The ownership moves it and makes me less inclined to want to take on that chalk when the irons could go cold at any moment.
I'm with you there. I'm sorry we're going so, but there's some intriguing guys I want to talk about. I got another question for you. Do you have a take on Takumi Kanaya?
So I don't, and Kanaya is somebody for me. He's 131st in my model, but that is stemming solely because I just don't have the information that I would want to see for him, and that's really all that comes down to, unfortunately. Do you have a take on him?
For those of listeners who don't know who he is, he's an up and coming guy. He's Japanese, right?
Yes.
He's Japanese. I think he was the number 1 amateur for a while. I think he's a pro. I think he does have a promising future. It seems like a lot of people are high on him. What that probably means, and we've seen it happen with a ton of other guys, is that people are going to overplay him, which it doesn't look like his ownership is high right now, but It probably means people are going to look at him and some of these tournaments he's going to compete, and people are going to overplay him because they see a young and promising player. I do think he's young and promising, but usually it still takes a few years before the full game rounds into shape. Usually guys that are that young don't usually fully compete quite yet. So I'm going to probably stay away from him, but you will probably see his name pop up starting in Twitter and other people talking about this up-and-comer because he is good and he's been killing it over in Japan. And I think it's exciting to have him here and competing. I just think it's still a little too early to start investing in him.
I would agree with that. It doesn't mean that he doesn't provide a good result here. And the proximity numbers that I do have from him, especially from that 125 to 150 range, and I would have to look to see how big of a sample size that is. That's something I'd have to check out after the show. Like that, I don't know if that's 2 rounds or 10 rounds, or it obviously can't be much more than that. But yeah, I think you're kind of always better on wait and see on a lot of those players.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think I'm guilty of it myself. I've been burned a few times overplaying guys like Garrett Kigo when he came over and been like, hey, this guy was so good. And then, I lost some on that. So it happens. It's exciting, but I tend to want to shy toward guys with experience in these tournaments more so than the new up-and-comers. So other than that, on the bottom of the 7K range here, a name I like a lot that we haven't mentioned is Patton Kizzire. Mm-hmm. I think Patton Kizzire is the epitome of what I was saying earlier of like his recent form is going to look bad, but he hasn't played a tournament in a few months. So it's like, what is his recent form? It's kind of like his first outing. In terms of his course history, it's really strong. I mean, he won the tournament in 2018. He top 10'd it last time. He is tied for 13th in 2019. Those are all really good scores. And we've seen, Patton Kizzire can string together a weekend where he can really get a top 5. So he certainly has the upside. And to put the icing on the cake, sub 10% ownership, nothing that's to be concerned about there. He can miss the cut too. I mean, Patton Kizzire is not safe by any means, but he's definitely someone that has enough upside that I would want to take a shot on down here in the lower 7K range. Other than that, Brian Stewart, he has 2 top 10s here. His driving accuracy should do well at sub 10%. I like him a lot. Other than that, I'm probably going to be pretty light on the bottom of this range. The last name I'll throw in there is Stuart Sink, who it's kind of funny. He's playing some of the best golf of his career at, however old, he's almost 50 years old. But it's, he looked good last week at the Century. I mean, again, he was competing in a different field, but I certainly wouldn't have scoffed at him being priced in the 8K range here this week and getting him down at the bottom of the 7K range with a solid, consistent history here. Not too many top 10s or anything like that, but he makes cuts. I mean, he's competing each time. I think, he has one of those weeks where his ball striking or his putter heats up. He can certainly compete.
Yeah, just to touch on that Sink thought with that. So one of the courses And I'm not a big comp course guy, but one of the courses that I do think you can comp Waialae to is Harbortown. That's the venue that Sink won at in 2021 to qualify for the Tournament of Champions last year. And I did think Sink showed a lot of positives in that showing. He gained 2.7 shots to the field off the T plus approach. He's been 19th to 42nd in each of his past 7 appearances at this track. I think his course history alone makes him definitely somebody worth considering down in this range. He has a bit of upside to him.
I agree. I think Sink might be getting overlooked a little bit, in my opinion. So with that being said, I'm going to pause on the 7K range. Anyone else you wanted to mention down here at the bottom?
No, Brian Stewart was somebody that Nick mentioned. He's 30th in my model for safety. I thought that was intriguing. Kazire's 13th overall in my model for safety, and that's not running a whole bunch of, of these last couple results. And I don't really care that he's gone miscut 56, 64, miscut. Like, he could have turned it around, and he has upside to win this tournament. We've seen it, but no, I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on some of the Corn Ferry guys I mentioned, like Ramey and Smalley. Do you have any opinions on Brandon Grace? Maybe he's a guy who played last week. KH Lee.
So Grace is a guy that I normally like a lot. I try to actually go to Grace, but this week I didn't love his showing last week. I didn't think looked like he was in great form. I don't think it's someone I want to go back to. Grace is another type of guy that I really like when he's playing well. Like, and he's in good form. Like, I don't know, he strings together a few good tournaments in a row. I want to go after him. Right now, I'm not sure I'm seeing that. My concerns with the Corn Ferry guys kind of go back to my kind of Kanaya theory of, like, I just don't know them yet, right? Like, we haven't seen what kind of strokes they gain against these types of fields, right? They're used to competing against each other, not the bigger field. So they don't have course history. That doesn't mean that they're not playable. Like, I'm not at all saying they're not playable. I don't have a good feel for them. So, like, I will default to the other guys who I just know better. But I don't think that means I'm going to completely fade them. Maybe a small percentage, a dart here or there, but definitely not going to be heavy or overweight on them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Brandon Grace last week, it's a different course, so I don't want to make too many comparisons, but he was dead last in my model last week. He was dead last in all iterations of my model from Thursday to Saturday night. Like, it never improved. That's a discouraging thing. I'd rather see some improvement, or at least something to warrant to believe that they were going to make a run, this week or do something. And I know Grace had a really good Sunday, but he made a lot of putts, and he can putt, but I don't want to be relying on a putter.
No, not especially not for him. He doesn't make his money putting. I mean, obviously guys to win, they have to make putts, but that was an easy course. I don't see it out of him right now. It wasn't like it was last summer maybe it was fall when he got hot and he was really competing in a lot of tournaments. That wasn't just a hot putter. That was him really clicking on all cylinders. That's not really what I saw from him last week.
No, not at all. And when we look at his stats from last week, he was horrible putting the first, 3 days. He gets hot with the putter, moves up the leaderboard marginally. I don't even know if he cracked the top 25. I think he was like 30th or whatever he ended up coming. So it still wasn't a good performance from him, but 81st overall in putting in my model. As you said, like, that's not what we want to be relying on if that's what kind of brought him through on Sunday. And that's kind of what I was seeing with it. So I'm out on him. And then I did see KH Lee receiving some pretty credible money in the market. I don't necessarily like him. He does have a 19th here last year. I don't have a great answer for why I would play him, because I'm not going to play him, but I did think that some of the movements around him were at least credible.
Yeah, I don't love KH Lee here. I'm not saying you have to fade him. I think, like you said, I think it's credible. I think he's playable. Not my choice. I think there's better plays for me.
I would agree with that sentiment to it, but just thought it was something worth throwing out there.
I love it. All right. Well, to wrap this up, let's take a look at this 6K range. I'm going to be pretty light here. I do think there's plenty of 7K, even low 7K range guys that I like, that I'll be rounding out a lot of my rosters with. There's a few guys down here in the 6K range that I'll throw some darts on, but for the most part, I'm definitely, again, like I've been saying, cut makers this week. I want to try and play some safety here, so I'm not going to go too deep. But to start off this 6K range, for me, I think someone who's interesting, who I want to start off by asking your opinion on, is Brandt Snedeker. What are your thoughts on him?
what do you like about Brandt Snedeker before I give my opinion on him?
My main is that he has a really good history and he's almost unowned. He's got it was a long time ago. In 16, he has a second. He's got a 16th and a 12th. He has 2 missed cuts. So in his last 5, it's 3 top 20s with a second and then 2 missed cuts. And I have a 2% ownership on him in a 6K range. So for those reasons, I think he's viable as a bullet. Like I said, I'm not really factoring in recent form because I don't think there's been a lot played. So if you're looking at recent form of elongated of like the last year, he hasn't been the Brandt Snedeker we're used to. Is a year he's kind of been falling back a little bit, but this is not, I wouldn't consider a super strong field. So feels like one he could compete in if he puts it together.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get into the 6,000s, if you can find upside traits like you just mentioned, and the 16th and the 12th are just from a couple years ago. So that is the positive. He's good at short courses. That's something that we can look at it and kind of like with it, but it's kind of in the same range of what you're saying with Kuchar. I'm a little bit afraid that he's just regressed in the wrong direction here. And maybe I'm wrong at 2% ownership. Sure. You can take the upside shot on him that he's turned it around, because that's the one thing that we don't know at this moment. And we're going to get a better idea for all these players in the next couple weeks. Where are these guys' games currently at? Did Snedeker find out something? Did Kuchar find out something? I mean, if the answer is yes, these guys can return to the quality of form that they were for all the years that we knew them to be with it. It's tough for me to find Snedeker into a lineup. I agree with you that I think this is the one downside to stacking the top of the card, which I mentioned. I don't love the $6,000 range. I think there's a lot of volatility down here. And I think that once you do stack the top, you're left in these spots where, if you do it every once in a while, you can throw Snedeker into a lineup. You can throw guys like that in, and you can find ways to go about it like that. But it's a tough range down here. Because as you said, it's a poor tournament past a certain point. You do have some $7,000 golfers that snuck down a little bit lower than they should have. But once you get into the 6s, like, everything plummets very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm pretty light down here. I mean, I'm probably not going to play much of anybody outside. I mean, someone who I might be a little bit intrigued by is Peter Malnotti. Just, again, pretty much a sheer history play where he has 3 top 30s, 2 top 15s in the last 2 years. So he seems to have an eye for this course at 6,600 and next to no ownership. But again, I don't love him. It's just, a way to pick somebody down here in the lowest 6Ks. But other than that, I'm going to be pretty lightweight. How about you? Who are you singling out here in the 6K range?
Yeah, and I think all of that makes sense. These are guys that have at least performed and given us top 20s in the past. And if they give you one of those and you put the other pieces together, then you're really in business to put, lineups together the way that you want with it. But I think Michael Thompson and Harry Higgs have playability at 6,900. They've combined to make 6 of 7 cuts at the track since 2017. I keep naming Corn Ferry players, but I like Nick Hardy at 6,600, 14th here last year. The guy I was going to say is Max Mcgreevey at 6,900. I feel like I keep touting him every single time this week, but 2 top 20s in a row in his previous 2 starts on tour. Iron numbers look very enticing for how he might handle a shorter course, but to get back to Hardy for a second, just a great iron player that hits a lot of greens in regulation. He will need to keep the ball in the fairway, but my numbers love him. And then the last 2, like if I'm going to go to near the very bottom, the last 2 guys that I would at least consider, Chan Kim, 6,300, Andrew Novak, 6,300. Novak is right on that fringe for me of making a cut or not making a cut, at 1 or 2% ownership. I don't really mind taking a shot just because if he does get you through a cut line, maybe he gives you a top 30 or 40 out of there. I think that's possible. Chan Kim has a little bit more upside to him. But I mean, these are guys that that's desperately rounding out a lineup. That's not people that I'm looking to get to by, more than a couple of percents.
And for folks who are actually, however you build your lines, if you're building 20, if you're building 5, one of my biggest advice, and I've said this in the past, but just as a reminder, don't play the game of build your lineup with 5 guys and then just pick whoever you can fit in that last 5. Some random guy in the 6K range is just going to ruin your lineup. Build your player pool of guys that are available for you to play first before you build any lineups. So there's 140 some odd golfers now. You might have a player pool of 30 or 40 that you're willing to play this week. Narrow that down, then build your lineup so that if you get to a point where you have 6,200 left and you just want to pick one random guy, that's going to ruin your lineup. You can't do that because that guy's not in your 30 or 40 players that you are allowed to play. So I've fallen into that trap before too. When you make lineups that you just kind of, hey, I love this lineup. I just need that one piece that's not breaking. It's going to ruin it because you're going to get a guy that's not going to make the cut and the whole lineup's ruined. So make sure you build your player pool first of guys that you want to play, then build your lineup so that you don't start dipping and kind of preying on Hail Marys that aren't going to come through for you.
That's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make. And I think that's a really good point that you just brought up with it, because people put together, look, you can make a lineup with 5 players and it's going to be a superstar lineup if your last player is going to be $6,000 with it. And I know everybody's thought process is, oh, well, these 5 guys, they're going to, come top 20 in this tournament. I'm going to have the winner in here. If this guy can just make the cut. And it's like, yeah, I understand that theory, but there's a reason why all these guys are this far down. And every once in a while, you find a guy who's mispriced. It happens. Like there was a situation with Justin Sun Vegas 2 years ago where he was at the bottom of the barrel on that board. And my model thought he was a top 10 player for the week. And he ended up coming in the top 10. And, that was a way that I was able to leverage ownership. I was able to create all these boomer bust builds because I didn't view it to be in a boomer bust fashion with it. There was a situation with Brian Harmon when he used to be in the 6,000s, but they're far and few between where you get those spots. Most of the times, these guys, even as much as I kind of like Max Mcgreevey, I think Higgs and Thompson are playable. As you said, Snedeker, you can maybe throw into a lineup. These are guys that have a ton of miscut potential. If they miss a cut, it's not going to surprise me. And I don't want to start losing really good builds from these guys. It's going to be proper lineups. As you said, if they're in my player pool of 30 or 40 players, they will make a lineup here and there with it, but it's going to be a lower exposure. And these guys at the very bottom just aren't going to be making my player pool.
Exactly. And that's why that, if you make your player pool of 30 to 40 and like your example comes up where one of those guys seems mispriced and you really like to the 60 range, then fine. Then when you're building your lineup, you squeeze them in. It makes sense. Totally fine. But make sure you make that determination before you convince yourself you like someone because they fit that last salary spot, because that's not the way to do it.
And trust me, you will end up convincing yourself with it, and that's what you do not want to do.
Yes. I've convinced myself of it all the time, and it's a terrible idea.
Yeah, I agree completely.
I love it. This is great. Great breakdown. I know we went a little long tonight, but we will still give you our outrights. We're going to still have some fun tonight, so we'll move quickly here. Spence, what are you looking at on the outright market?
Yeah, I have 4 outright tickets this week. Billy Horschel, 50-1. Siwoo Kim, 60-1. I bit the bullet right when it came out on Corey Connors at 31-1. I know he's down to 26-1 now. I'm kind of starting to get shades of Cameron Smith in my mind where that number moved, and I thought that it had moved a little bit too far with it. So I'm going to say 26-1 is still fine. I think that's right on the fringe of where's proper on it. And then I'm going to throw a dart throw on Chris Kirk and hope I get the good version of him at 80-1.
I like it. I think this is a week to take some long shots. So I have a few longer numbers here. My favorite, Patton Gazire at 100-1.
It's a good price.
I just like that number on him. I think Keegan Bradley at 90-1. It's just a good number again. And we didn't even mention him on the DFS side, but at 90-1, I think that's just a good number for him. And the more, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, realistic side, Bez I like at 60-1. And my last outright ticket play that I'm going to take a look at for this week is Corey Connors at 18-1.
We, on the Better Golf Pod, Nick and I talked a lot about Keegan Bradley this week. I think Bradley makes a ton of sense in markets across the board. And I think that Bradley reaches this thing where everybody knows his putting is so bad that they don't want to bet him because they don't think he can win. So the numbers get a little bit more inflated than they should be. People on DraftKings are afraid to play him because they think the putter is going to be bad. They don't want to play him. And those are kind of the spots where Keegan Bradley has real potential. I don't know if he's going to win the tournament. Him and Answer were the first 2 guys to miss my card. Both of those guys were on Nick's outright ticket. I think they're both very savvy spots to go, but I think Bradley is intriguing at that 90-1. And if you look on the offshore market, there is a book out there at 110-1. So if you shop around, that is a very enticing number.
Yeah, and if there's listen, I'm building a narrative to cock myself into it, but if there's a course that his putting might get neutralized a bit, it's the one in Hawaii where people go to vacation and play golf, and maybe it's a little bit of an easier surface. So it's a little bit of a narrative that you can build to convince yourself that maybe he can neutralize his putter in a field in a course like this.
This is not going to shock anybody. 6th in ball striking, 1st in my model for the weighted proximity for Waialae. That's what you expect with Keegan Bradley. It just comes down to make a couple putts and Nick put it in the best fashion maybe of anybody this week. Maybe he just ends up having a Colin Morikawa week where he sticks everything to 3 feet and makes all the putts and that's the route he goes with it. It's certainly possible.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy this week, other than maybe Connors or one of those guys. He's the guy that would do that. So, I mean, at that low of an odds, I like taking a little shot on that. But now, the first round leaders. This is where we make our money. Obviously, we have no money left because we spent it all last week. So, I don't know what to tell you guys. You're out of luck here. But we're going to take the first round leader. I think there's some fun plays. This is the type of tournament where you can get like the right numbers. Right? There's enough guys where you can find some fun numbers to take a shot on. So, Spence, kick us off. Who you like for some first round leader plays?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball without Sia here to give me the correct answer this week because 100% Sia would have had the correct answer this week. He's not going to go 2 weeks in a row without the right answer.
Well, it's obvious. I mean, Sia still has the correct answer. He just, unfortunately, this week isn't providing it for all of us. So that's where we have to try and make up for it.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. As I said, I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball, but it's 2 guys for me this week. It's Siwoo Kim at 70-1. It is Keegan Bradley at 80-1. That's how I decided to get my exposure to Keegan Bradley. I could see him, and we see it all the time with him. He goes wild on Thursday, and the Friday round isn't quite what we saw on Thursday, and the tournament falls apart. But stick it close, make a bunch of putts, or maybe don't even need to make that many putts. Just stick it close enough where you tap it in, and he can make a run on Thursday.
I love it. I have 3 plays, all pretty long shots. I start with Stuart Sink at 80-1. And then I have 200-1 plays with Emiliano Grillo and Brian Stewart.
Yeah, I like all 3 of those also. Sink was on the short list. If I added a third, it was going to probably be him.
Yeah. And both Grillo and Stewart are 100-1. I don't know if I said that. But that's it. That's what we got for this week. I think I'm excited to get some, for lack of a better way of saying it, normalcy back from our perspective, right? Get a full field. Give us a cut event. I think it's going to be a lot of fun this week. Spence, how about you? Any last words?
No, I agree with you. It's nice to have golf back with these full man fields. I think next week we're going to even have a better tournament than we do this week. I'm hoping so, at least, to where we don't have things jumble up in all the same areas. But that doesn't mean we can't find a way to use it to our advantage, find routes that other people aren't going to consider. With everybody going to all the same zones, quote unquote, everybody's going to make the same mistakes here. So if we can find a way to differentiate our process, we mentioned a bunch of guys that are going to be allowing you to do that with it. So just keep that in mind. Be cognizant of how you want to build your ownership this week. Just don't go too heavy with it. And I think you can find an advantage.
I agree. I think this can be a fruitful week. Please hit the like button. Give us a follow. You can find Spence at Tee Off Sports. I'm at Draftmaster Flex. Come back next week. Please let us know how you did. I'd love to see the green screens and sports.